In this final portion of the presentation, I want to talk about how to read and evaluate the research that you find. Again, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, we can be inundated with hundreds of articles. And what we need to be able to do is sort through them and find the ones that are most relevant and most helpful in helping us answer our questions that we've posed and solve problems for our clients. In this class, we're going to read a lot of different research articles. Some of them I'll be providing for you. Some you're going to find on your own for various assignments and for your final project, which is a literature review. So let's talk a little bit more about what is found in a primary, empirical, peer-reviewed research article so you can better understand how to approach reading them and evaluating these articles. As I said before, there's tons of information out there that we can find, research that's good quality, very well done, reviewed by peers, and of very high quality. However, we have to decide, one, is it done well? But more importantly, does it really help us answer the question we want to answer? Does it help us with our clients, with the people that we work with? So I think by understanding kind of what's in all of the articles, we can sort through them more quickly, more efficiently, more effectively, and find the articles that are going to be most useful for us in answering our particular question. So what is found in a typical research article? You're all graduate students. You've probably read a lot of research articles already, so you kind of know the answer to this, but let's review it real quickly. The components that we find typically include a review of the relevant research, a clear description of what the research purpose is. And that purpose, you want to be able to find that quickly because that tells you if this article really is of value to you or not. There is a good bit of information about the research design. How did they set up the study? How did they collect their data, and so on? There is typically a very solid description of the sampling that was used and the subjects utilized. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here in a second. Data collection methods, the tools that were utilized, the measures that were taken, and so on. And that's often going to be very interesting to you as well because you may be utilizing some of the same tools to collect your data. And then there is a summary of the results, an analysis of the results, and then a conclusion. What do these results mean? A lot of this information is found actually in the abstract. So this is the abstract from the foam roller, vibrating versus non-vibrating foam roller study that I've mentioned before. And we can see a lot of that information in here. We can see the purpose in the very first sentence. We can see kind of some idea of the design of how they set it up. We can see a listing of the measures that they took here. We can see a description of the subjects and so on. So a lot of this information in a very concise way is listed in the abstract, but we can get more information about each of these sections in the actual article. So where is this information found? Again, in most articles, you're going to see them organized in the same fashion. So this is the actual article where they examined vibrating foam rollers, compared them to non-vibrating foam rollers on subjects that had done some type of eccentric training, most likely to induce muscle damage, and they looked at their rate of recovery with these foam rolling techniques. And again, what we can see here, obviously, is the title of the article, the list of authors and their associations where they work. But most importantly, obviously, the articles typically are going to start off with an abstract. You've probably seen the abstract already when you did your search for literature on whatever search engine you used. But the abstract is a great place to start. I start with a title, see if it's something that's potentially relevant, and then dive a little bit deeper into the abstract. And as I said, a lot of the important information can be found in the abstract, but obviously greater details found in the article as a whole. A review of the relevant research is typically found in a section at the very start. Often it's called the introduction. I really love reading the introductions because what these authors do in the introduction is they summarize the articles that are related to this topic. So by reading the article's introduction, it gives us a kind of a concise review of the literature that's been done before. So it gives us some ideas of what's been found with foam rolling. It tells us something a little bit more about other treatments that maybe can affect some of these rates of recovery and so on. So you really can glean a lot of information by reading the introduction. What I really like for the introduction as well, and this is a great cheat for all of you when you're writing your lit review, when you find a really good article, they've probably found a lot of other really good articles that are right up your alley. So if you have an article that's really kind of perfect for your lit review, fits real well, always check out these articles that are cited in their introduction as well as in their references at the end, because they probably have some articles that you may want. But again, we see this description of the previous literature here in this introduction, and then typically the introduction ends with a kind of a conclusion of what is not known and what are they going to study. So they typically end with what are the goals of this current study. In the methods section, we can see information about the participants. We can see information about the procedures and the measures taken. I always do pay attention to the participants because I want to see if they're like the people that I work with. So maybe you work with elderly, maybe you work with young, healthy individuals, college-age athletes, whatever it may be. The closer the population of this study is to your population, the more applicable it is. So if I see they did foam rolling on 80 and 90-year-old men, and I work with a youth girls soccer team, I might want to take the findings with a grain of salt. We may not see a lot of similar findings. It may not be real applicable to me. But if we see that they're very similar to my population, that makes the study even of greater interest to me. So typically what they're going to list in the participant section is how they found these people and some of the characteristics of these individuals. So in this study, they used 38 healthy people. There were 32 men and 6 women. So there were some women, but it was much more heavily men. So that could potentially affect the results if we think that foam rolling has a different effect on men than women. So we can see that information there. We can see their age was 22 years, give or take 3 years. So most of the people were in and around their early 20s. They were free from any injuries. They were considered active. That's of interest to me because, again, I maybe work with active individuals. So this would be applicable to people that are younger, healthy, physically active, and so on. Anyway, but it gives you information about the actual subjects in the study. And then the procedure section sometimes goes into much more detail than maybe you want to know. But sometimes it's of interest. So I'm interested because they said at the beginning, right? I always like these torture studies where they say we're looking at the effects on recovery after exercise with induced muscle damage. That's kind of interesting to me. How do they induce the muscle damage? Well, it tells you here how they do that. They induce the muscle damage with overload eccentric training using an inertial flywheel, which again, kind of we cause them to get delayed onset muscle soreness in this study. And then they looked at recovery in range of motion after this soreness. So again, if you're working your clients very hard, they're reporting a lot of soreness, this study may be of interest to you because it shows how can we recover from that soreness. So if you're working with, again, higher weights, higher workloads where we're really seeing some soreness, this study may be of even greater interest to you if you're interested in how to improve recovery. Also, we can see, again, how they did their measurements, how they measured pain, how they measured range of motion, and so on. And again, you may find that you use similar tests to measure some of these aspects of recovery or these aspects of function. And then in the results section, typically what you see is a description of the subjects. You see a description of the findings, before and after treatment. And again, typically these findings are going to be listed as a table of numbers, but then also often you'll see graphs or figures like the ones you see here. And then I always find pretty interesting their description of the conclusions, or their kind of summing it all up. The conclusion section is fairly short typically, and it is a good thing to read. If you're only going to read a few parts of the study, I read typically the introduction, well, obviously the abstract. I read the introduction and the conclusion, because the conclusion really sums up what they found. So there was a lot of things in here. There was a lot of measurements they took, a lot of numbers and statistics, but the conclusion kind of wraps it up like as to what does this mean to me? So how does this apply to me and my clients? So the conclusion is a great place to read as well. So often I read the abstract, the intro, and then the conclusion. If the article is really of interest to me, then I maybe go back and read the methods and the results as well. So when you find these studies, a lot of evaluation occurs. As I said, when we do a literature review, which we're going to talk more about in the next topic, but when you start finding articles, it's easy to get overwhelmed. So we need to evaluate them. When I say evaluation, I'm not so much concerned that you evaluate the quality of the articles. Again, if they're in a peer-reviewed journal, then we can kind of assume that's been done for us. What we have to evaluate them for, however, is how useful they are to me and to the question I'm attempting to answer. So when I'm evaluating research studies, as I said, typically I look at the topic, the title, I look at the abstract, then I'll look at potentially the intro and the conclusions. And what I'm looking for is, what is the purpose of the study? Are they looking to answer a question that helps me answer my bigger question? So if I'm trying to decide the best type of foam roller to use, and I read that previous study that we just talked about, then sure, it's perfect. It's right up my alley. The purpose is clearly stated. I know what they're looking for. It really maybe has some relevance to me and my clients. So I'm going to look a little further into the article. I look to see, is there a review of the literature in their article? Do I read it? Hey, this gives me some additional information, maybe some other directions to go. And it, does it prepare me to read the rest of the article and understand the topic that they are going to be researching? Also, when we look at these research studies, we need to see, do they clearly describe the subjects? How were they selected, and what did their participation entail? Like, I want to see, are these subjects like the people I work with? Are these like my clients? Can I expect my clients to react in a similar way as these subjects did? And if so, then it becomes even more relevant and more useful for me. Is there a detailed description of the treatment and the intervention? I want to know exactly, I know they use two different types of foam rollers, but I want to know exactly how did they use the foam rollers? Did they do foam rolling over the entire length of the muscle? Did they just do it over trigger points? Did they hold that foam roller on the muscle for a certain period of time? How much pressure did they apply? I want to know those types of details, because that's going to affect how I'm going to do the treatment with my clients. So does the researcher provide that level of detail? I also want to know, what type of measures did they use? How do they measure range of motion? How do they measure pain? And again, is that relevant to my clients? Finally, does the author clearly describe how the data was analyzed and how they came to their conclusions without overreaching? These subjects, we saw improved range of motion after this delayed onset muscle soreness. Well, we may not see the same benefits of the two different foam rollers on healthy people that do not have soreness. If my goal is just to increase range of motion, this may not be as applicable as it is to people that have this soreness and you want to restore range of motion after a particularly hard workout. So we have to keep all of those things in mind when we are evaluating these research studies. So some practical tips. I think you can easily get overwhelmed. I'm going to, in this course, part of the course assessment is to start to find articles on a topic of interest to you, specifically to try to answer a question. It can really be easy to get overwhelmed. If you type in a couple search terms, you're very likely to come up with 1,000 articles that meet your search criteria. So it's easy to become overwhelmed in the amount of research that's out there. So we have to have a strategy for finding and reading research and hopefully finding the research that is most applicable to the question you're attempting to answer, to the clients you're going to work with, and so on. So typically, I read the titles first and see is it in the ballpark. If the title says yes, then I read the abstract. The abstract should give me a very good idea of what the purpose of the study was and what their findings were, as well as who their subjects were. And those are the three main things that I look at to see if this is applicable to my type of subjects, my interest area. I'll also potentially take a look at the methods, the treatments that they did and so on. If I see they're using some incredibly expensive type of equipment, then that I know is not in the realm of possibility for me to purchase, then obviously I pass on that. But again, if you're still interested, if the article still seems like it might be applicable to you and your question, then I read the introduction for a quick review of the literature and a much more detailed description of the purpose of the study. And then finally, I take a look at the subjects, see if they're applicable to my clients, and then I'll read the methods, paying particular attention to the intervention and again, how they applied the treatment. Is this something I would do? Is it similar to how I do it now? Should I look at changing potentially how I apply my foam roller and so on? And then I look at what measures of performance enhancement they're examining. If they're looking at improving jump height and I'm working with seniors, then maybe that's not applicable to me. However, if they're looking at improving range of motion, that's probably applicable to almost any population that we're working with if our goal is to enhance performance and prevent injury. So anyway, those are some of my practical tips. As you read more and more articles, you'll get much more efficient at looking through the articles, finding out the important information, and deciding whether or not it's a good article for you. Anyway, that's the end of this series of presentations where I introduced the topic of research literacy. This presentation really goes hand in hand with the first chapter from the textbook Research Literacy, a primer for understanding and using research. And then we talked about two different articles in these presentations. The first by Cheatham et al., the second by Romero, Moraleda. And again, both really interesting articles, especially if you have an interest in self-myofascial release and the use of a foam roller.